Hi everyone, I'm Remy Rippon, Senior Beauty and Health Editor at Vogue Australia. Whilst I'm not there in person, it's great to see so many of you back for our live event today. There's no question the world has faced many challenges over the past 3 years, but creating, trialling and distributing the COVID-19 vaccines has to be among the hardest and most high profile. Proving in the most critical way that medical research quite literally saves lives, the speedy creation of the COVID vaccine saved millions of lives and has brought the pandemic to manageable levels in countries with high rates of vaccination. Here, we're joined by one person who was intimately involved in the process, Professor Catherine Green, head of the Clinical BioManufacturing Facility at Oxford University, who was part of the team who produced the AstraZeneca Oxford vaccine. Welcome, Professor Green.
Hello.
To start with, can you talk us through how you were involved in creating the COVID vaccine?
Yeah, sure. So I'm lucky enough to head a small team of people at the University of Oxford, and we make medicines. So we make biological medicines for use in clinical trials. So small batches of high quality medicine, good enough to use in people, normally for the very first time. Our aim is to take innovation which comes out from the university and prove that that can work in a clinical setting, in a real human clinical trial setting. So we have, over the last 20 years, manufactured lots of vaccines for use against many diseases that you will have heard of: influenza, tuberculosis, malaria, rabies, and many others that you won't perhaps have heard of: chikungunya, Nipah, other emerging pathogens. So we have a long track record of working with scientists at the university to develop their vaccine ideas into reality. And so when Sarah Gilbert in very early 2020 had noticed this new pneumonia of unknown origin transmitting in China, and as soon as that was registered as being a coronavirus, her ears were immediately alerted to that, because we had previously made a vaccine against a coronavirus that was in use in clinical trials, Middle Eastern respiratory syndrome, and that vaccine project was going well. So we knew we had the ability to make vaccines against coronaviruses. We had the technology in place to do that. And so we started very early January 2020, working up what we would need in order to manufacture a vaccine against the new coronavirus. And as every day, the news got worse coming out of China and then the spread into Europe during February 2020, we were already ramping up our efforts to say, right, it looks like we are going to need this vaccine. We're going to need it fast. We are the right team to be able to deliver that very first manufacturing dose, and then to teach a larger scale manufacturing partner how to do that so that we can get enough doses out to the world.
What was the biggest challenge you faced during that process? Because I can imagine there were a few.
Yeah, so as I said, it's something that we knew how to do, but we'd never done it under that time requirement before, under that speed pressure before, and we'd never done it in those specific circumstances before. I think that naively, because we've been thinking about making disease vaccines for diseases for pandemics for a long time, but mostly we've been making those to ship to other countries for trials where those diseases are causing problems. So I think naively we had thought that when we were making a vaccine for a pandemic, we would be doing the same. We'd be making it in the comfort and security of Oxford and then sending it to a place where it was needed. But of course, pandemic doesn't mean that, does it? Pandemic means global problem. And so we were having to make the vaccine and run the clinical trial in the situation where the pandemic was dramatically affecting all of our lives, as it was globally. So the challenges mostly were logistical and to do with the fact that we couldn't get childcare, we couldn't get food, we couldn't get public transport, and then we couldn't get materials that we needed to manufacture the vaccine, supply chain, logistics issues. And that's something I think we have to learn, isn't it? That we have to build planning for that kind of logistic backup into pandemic planning. It's not good enough to just know how to make a vaccine when you need it. You also have to have the ability to do that, and that needs people and it needs things. And that wasn't always available to us at times during the pandemic. It was very challenging.
Absolutely. Can you describe that moment when you actually got the vaccine in your own arm?
Yeah, so the rollout here in the UK started early 2021, and that was reserved for people in very high risk categories. So the elderly, people over the ages of 70, frontline healthcare workers. So we didn't get the vaccines till about Easter of that year, but still it was a very exciting moment for us. We'd all volunteered for the clinical trials, which ran in 2020, me and my team. But they had decided, because we were working so closely with the team, it would be too complicated to keep our data secure, not known to us. So we went down with everybody else of our age group to the football stadium here in Oxford, joined the queue, and were vaccinated by the wonderful volunteer team there. And I couldn't resist telling the nurse that, I was part of the team that made that, because it was a real moment for me. And I think it was that the energy in those places when we were getting vaccinated was really one of hope, that it started to feel that might be the beginning to the end of what had been a really difficult time for everybody, I mean, globally as well as in the UK.
Can you share with us how you kind of got to the position you're in now? What's been, a snapshot of your career to date?
So it's a relatively normal science career, I suppose. Undergraduate at the University of Cambridge, and then a PhD in London. And then I was funded by the European Union to do an exchange program to go and do science in Europe. So I spent 3 years in Paris at the Institut Curie. During those early stages of my career, I was and still am interested in human genetics, and particularly in how your genetic material changes during your lifetime, how that influences aging and cancer. And so I've always been interested in how cells work, how the human body works at the cellular level. So a great 3 years in Paris as a young person doing science and having fun. And then to the University of Sussex in Brighton on the beach. Not as good as the beaches in Australia, perhaps, but still a nice beach in the UK, doing science still very much on skin cancer risk with a very eminent guy called Professor Lehman, who remains a good friend. Then back to Cambridge to start my own lab. So science careers are based on where you can get funding to do your research. So you apply for a project to do a specific project in a specific place and get funding for that. So I was funded by Cancer Research UK, still looking at how genetic changes are maintained through our lifetimes. Then to Oxford to start a team in Oxford, and I've headed the vaccinology, the vaccine manufacturing team there since 2018. Although it sounds like that's different to cancer genetics, I still keep my cancer genetics team. And the methods that we use are very similar. So it's cell biology, it's the ability to grow human cells and manipulate them. And we do that in the research team, and we also do that in the manufacturing space. So it fits quite well for me to lead that team as well.
Yeah. Have you seen this space kind of change for women in the last few years? And do you think the visibility of women in like academia, research, medicine has improved at all?
I think that's an interesting question. Sarah Gilbert, one of the other scientists on this program, and the lady who led the program from the start, and I have done quite a lot of public-facing things during the story of the vaccine, telling people the story of the vaccine and trying to publicise the reality of manufacturing that and what it's been like as a team to be able to get across the people involved and the process involved in making this vaccine, in a hope to kind of reassure perhaps that the process was done properly, even though it was done fast. And we often get asked this question. I think perhaps it's unusual to have perhaps 2 women. In fact, there were 3 women. Tess Lamb was also really involved in the project. She did all the immunology. To have a group of women being seen to be in charge of a scientific project. But the reality in our day-to-day lives, of course, is we have women at pretty much 50% across all of the levels of science that we operate, apart from perhaps the very top levels of the professor levels, the people that lead the universities. So people, I think, have been surprised to see so many women, but they really are there. Perhaps what we did this time was we were prepared to speak up, to be the people that go on TV. Perhaps there's been a tendency for us to just get on with doing the science and not be the ones that put our heads above the parapet and do the talking. And so I think that might change. Perhaps women might put themselves forward more to do the talking, because as we're seen to be the scientists, then everyone will understand that women are the scientists. Because I think for the majority in the biological sciences area, there are lots of great women doing lots of great science at the moment. And we will continue to fight to get to the very top levels and do the very top jobs. That's less true in some of the other STEM subjects, of course. When we look in physics, women are still significantly underrepresented. And that's a shame, because physics is a really fascinating science, and more women doing it would only be a good thing, wouldn't it?
Absolutely. Now, pandemics, they're not going to stop happening, especially with things like climate change. What is being done to safeguard us from future illnesses?
I think that's right. I think as our human environment impacts more on the natural world, we will see people being in more proximity to animals. So we will have these crossover events where viruses are able to, that used to exist in animal populations, and they are able to move into human populations, whether that's intensive farming, people living in close proximity to their animals, or whether it's habitat removal and destruction, so animals come closer to us. So we will start to see viruses move from animals into humans more. If we think about the viruses that exist in the world that we know about, there are about, I think it's 25 families that infect humans. And if you look at all of the viruses in the world in those 25 families, there's more than 1 million viruses that exist that had then potential to cross over into humans. So we need a real strong underpinning of basic science here. We need to understand quite a lot about those families of virus already, because that will be the knowledge from which you will be able to rapidly apply to think about what a vaccine would need to be in an emergency situation. And we probably need to have done some work on making vaccines against known family members in all those families, so that we know what to do. The way that we had done MERS helped us to be able to do COVID quickly. If we study and test vaccines against these known virus families, we're kind of already halfway there to being able to make a vaccine. And then as well as vaccinology, of course, the other things that we need to be able to do are good antiviral treatments, so things that would prevent viral infections taking hold. And since the recovery trial, which also ran out of Oxford, and other trials, we would be able to set them up quickly next time. And we have to think a lot about observation and reporting and communication across the globe. So when a virus has crossed over into humans and we start to see that human-to-human transmission, which is what obviously is the dangerous thing, if people can pass it on to family members and then spread it in the wider community, we need to have good reporting of that, no blame reporting of that, because it's nobody's fault if that happens, and then try to get containment at source. We have seen what happens if a virus gets out of control and is able to spread globally. Much, much better to put significant resources into containment when those are first identified, because we could have avoided all of the problems if we had managed to contain it at source in early 2020, late 2019. So that takes global effort, communication, scientific communication, and political will, doesn't it? And I hope we learn all of those things, but I'm not sure how easy that is to do.
Yeah, I mean, medical research is notoriously underfunded. What do you think needs to be done to help promote funding to these sorts of projects?
It's difficult, isn't it? We have a lot of priorities. Of course we do. And as with all things, if we're talking about government-funded taxpayers' money, we have to think about how to allocate those resources well. So we also need to research skin cancer. We also need to research heart disease. We also need to research kidney failure. Yeah, these are also big problems. But when we think about infectious diseases, I think that has in the past been particularly underfunded, because governments in rich countries realistically don't see much of an impact of that on their lives up until 2020. We kind of thought that infectious diseases were eliminated mostly by our effective vaccination policy as children in the West. Yeah? So I think this has brought to the forefront the idea that it's important to be prepared, and that we do need to continue to fund research in this area, and that eradicating some diseases in other parts of the world is worth us spending money on, because we do not want to be in a situation where a disease we already know about, which affects people in lower income countries, gains the ability to spread rapidly and can affect us all over the world. So spending some of our money helping others is probably the right thing to do now.
What is the process for getting funding for a project? Is it based on any selection criteria specifically? And I guess, how can researchers improve their chances of getting more funding?
So it depends on which country you're in and which institution you are applying for funds to. So always you need to write a research proposal, put together a document saying what experiments you want to do, what the aim of your experiments are, how you're going to address that question, what you think the outcomes will be. And then, yes, these are normally highly competitive situations where you and other researchers in the same field, in the same country, submit a research proposal to a government funding body, or to here the Wellcome Foundation or to the Gates Foundation, and ask for support. And then that will be overseen by a panel of experts, and the top 10% will be selected for funding, and then you can go off and do your research. These are normally time limited, so you can have 3 years or 5 years on a project, and then you collate the results of that and then start that process again. Okay, we did that. That's given us some, you can have confidence that we're doing the science well. Now we want to do this, will you fund us again? So it's continual competitive funding on a project by project basis normally. And so obviously one way to get more money in is to be successful last time. You have a reputation of good quality work. And the other way is to continue to find interesting things and often to find interesting collaborators. So to identify people globally who are asking the same question in a different way or asking a different question in the same way, bringing together expertise, because that is often thought of to be a highly effective way to do science these days in this era of global communication particularly. So find a good team, find a good question, and then write a good proposal.
What's your advice for young women who want to get into STEM careers, specifically, I guess, the medical research space?
So I always say, firstly, that it's a fantastic career to choose, mostly because of the people that you'll be working with. Who wouldn't want to work with really clever people on really difficult questions that are important to people's health? Yeah, it's a great privilege to work with the people that I work with, who are trying to solve some of the big challenges of today's world, and trying to have a real positive impact in the world. And the other thing I would say is that science needs to be seen. And so we have to, as scientists, be prepared to speak. It's no longer a matter of just being in the laboratory, doing your little bits of research. Science is now also about presenting that to other scientists and presenting it to the world. So take some time to practice some presentation skills and some ability to speak about science. And there will be times during a scientific career when things don't go well. So it's going to be really important that you find an area, a subject that you're passionate about, that you really want to make a contribution to, because you will have those weeks where nothing goes right and your experiments are not successful and you can't see the end of it. So you have to have the desire to answer your question, because one day you might be the only person in the world who knows the answer, because you've done the experiment and you've figured it out. And that's an amazing thing.
Absolutely. In terms of vaccine science, where do we go to next? And what are some of the exciting developments in this space?
I mean, there will always be new and interesting developments in vaccine science, because we have a group of hugely clever people working on it. So we in Oxford will continue to make vaccines against a lot of the diseases which were on our worry list prior to COVID. But of course, the Pfizer and the Moderna vaccines, the mRNA vaccines, will be transformative in the space, because that technology has been proven to be extremely effective. And so we will also look to see if we can adopt some of those technologies or new technologies completely that come along. And there are other diseases not caused by viruses which are harder to make vaccines against. And so we will continue also to look at new ways to make effective vaccines against bacterial pathogens. One of my colleagues in the University of Oxford, Professor Adrian Hill, is just finishing his phase 3 trials on a highly effective malaria vaccine. And if that team is successful, I think that will be highly transformative. Malaria killed 600,000 people last year, mostly children under the age of 5. So to see a malaria vaccine being widely deployed in the world will be a hugely transformative event. So there will always be more diseases for us to study and new technologies for us to do that with.
Well, Professor Green, that's actually all we have time for today, but thank you so much for sharing these incredible stories and insights with us. Back over to you all at the summit.